Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Schuman, before that brief interruption, I was showing you 38. You said that was showing contusion to the left palm area of Mr. Swanson?
Yes.
Okay. And consistent with a defensive injury?
Yes.
And then, very briefly, 39, see 39?
Yes.
And briefly explain what we're looking at there.
This is a photograph of the left hand, the back of the thumb and hand, and then showing a contusion involving the hand beneath the thumb.
And again, that would be consistent with a defensive injury?
Yes.
And then let me show you what's been marked as People's 245 for identification. Appears to be the skull of Mr. Barry Swanson. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
Okay. And when you reviewed the photographs and reviewed this 3D model, did you have an opinion as to the accuracy of the fractures that appear on the 3D model?
Yes. And
what was the opinion?
I found that it was a good representation of the fractures.
Okay. And if I can show you on the Elmo 245, I believe that shows us the diastatic fractures we were looking at earlier in terms of the photograph.
Yes.
And then to the back of the head, we see those fractures as well. They are an accurate representation of the injuries you saw on the photographs?
Yes.
Let's move on, if we can, to Mr. Michael Martin. Show you 48 for verification. And do you recognize that photograph there?
Yes.
Okay. And as with Mr. Swanson and Mr. Anderson, does that appear to be the bag tag showing the body coming into the coroner's office of Mr. Michael Martin?
Yes.
And let me show you 42 for identification. What are we looking at in 42, Dr. Schuman?
This is a photograph of the left side of Mr. Martin's head, and there is a laceration on the temporal parietal area of the scalp.
And let me show you a close-up of that, if I may. People's 43 for identification. Does 43 appear to be a close-up to what you just mentioned in 42?
Yes.
Okay. And can you explain, in terms of the injuries, exactly what we're looking at there?
And so again, the scalp has been shaved around the injury so you can visualize it better. And this is an irregular Y-shaped laceration with some abrasion surrounding it, involving the temporal and parietal scalp on the left side.
Okay. And then showing you what's been marked as 44 for identification. Is that a good orientation, or would you like me to rotate one more?
One more, please.
44 now. What are we looking at?
This is a photograph of the left side of Mr. Martin's skull after the scalp has been reflected forward over the face and backwards over the back of the skull. And you can see multiple depressed skull fractures in the area beneath the laceration of the left temporal and parietal skull.
Okay. And showing you 45 for identification. You see 45?
Yes.
Does that appear to show in exclusive detail the multiple fractures to Mr. Martin's skull?
Yes.
Okay. Is the skull actually coming away, breaking off in those areas?
It appears some of the fragments are, yes, coming apart from the skull.
If I may, let me show you 46 for identification. It's just a close-up of what we saw in 45. Does that better reflect the fragmentation of the skull, with pieces of skull breaking away?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of your review of the photographs of Mr. Michael Martin, the injuries that he had all appear to be to the left side of his head, in the left temporal area?
Yes.
Okay. He had no defensive injuries to him?
No.
Nothing to the arms or the elbows?
No.
Okay. In terms of your expert opinion in terms of a cause of death, were you able to determine a cause of death for Mr. Michael Martin from your independent review?
Yes.
And what was that?
Multiple blunt force injuries of head.
Now, in addition to looking at the photograph, did you review people's 243, and again showing you what's been previously identified as a 3D model of Mr. Michael Martin's head?
Yes.
Okay. And in reviewing the model and in reviewing the photographs of the injuries, were you able to give an indication as to whether the 3D model accurately reflected the injuries that were photographed at autopsy?
Yes, I found the 3D model to be a good representation of the fractures.
Okay. And again, let's focus in on the left side of Mr. Michael Martin's skull. And there, in 3D, you will see the depression to the skull caused by the force applied to it by a blunt instrument.
Yes.
And in terms of the 3D here, we can actually see that indentation and see the fragmenting of the skull. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, Ross. Just so we're clear, Dr. Schuman, you did not perform the autopsies in this case, correct?
Correct.
You are basing your opinions on the photographs that were taken. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all.
First, no rejection.
All right, so witness excused.
Yes.
Yes.
You're excused. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Your next witness, short, long?
We're not going to finish before noon, but it's not a long witness here.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Gina Williams.
I do. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Gina Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Williams, what do you do for a living?
I am employed by the California Department of Justice Riverside Crime Laboratory.
What's your title?
A senior criminalist.
What is a senior criminalist?
I receive evidence in the laboratory, and I examine that evidence in an effort to determine whether or not a crime was committed.
And we've had a criminalist testify earlier in this trial, and I understand that as a criminalist, there are many different fields that you may be called upon to testify to.
That's correct.
All right. Will you educate the jury a little bit about your training and experience?
I'm assigned to the trace evidence unit. So in my unit, I usually look at things that require some type of microscopic work, although not always. Anything from hair, paint, fibers, tape, rope, evidence such as that.
Okay. And so how long have you been a criminalist?
I have been with the Department of Justice just over 20 years, and I was previously employed by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department in the same capacity.
All right. Now, with regard to this particular case, did you receive some items of evidence?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's 210. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
Yes.
What is it?
That is actually a box. I believe the item number is ND21, and it contained a baseball bat.
All right. So as I zoom in, and do you see where it states ND21 is the item number?
Yes, just above the barcode.
Okay. Item number ND21, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So now you received this box, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so I assume you opened the box.
I did.
All right. Showing you People's 211. And is that what was inside the box?
Yes.
Okay. And will you tell the jury what we see here?
This is a black Louisville Slugger baseball bat.
Now showing you People's 202. Oh, and the bat that you see in the box here, it has a wrapping around one end. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you know what the purpose of that wrapping is for?
There was some biological materials on that end of the bat, and that paper, I believe, was placed around that to protect those materials.
Okay. And showing you People's 202. And is this the bat without the wrapping around it?
Yes.
And then also showing you People's 203. And that's more of a zoomed in, closer look at the bat. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you do any research with regard to bats or this particular type of bat?
I did.
And what type of research did you do?
Mainly, I did some internet research and also contacted the company just to verify what some of the markings meant on the bat itself.
Okay. And why did you do that research?
Just so that I would know what the markings on the bat meant, and so that I would know, hopefully, what type of paint they use at their factory.
Okay. And were you able to get some information that assisted you?
On the markings, yes.
Okay. And what was that?
There's various markings on the bat that are not in this image. The T141 is actually the bat style, so that's the style of the length versus the diameter of the bat at the top. And there are some other markings that are used by the company to designate what type of wood is used and what the bat is rated for.
Showing you People's, again, 202. Is there anything in there that gives you additional information, or that you found additional information?
That's just the Louisville Slugger logo and emblem that they place on the bat.
Okay. Moving on to People's 215. You received other items of evidence Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now showing you this exhibit, do you know what this is?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a large manila envelope. The item number is ND44. You can see above the barcode. And it contained a biological specimen container inside.
All right. And so now, of course, you opened this envelope. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Showing you people's 216. Is that what was inside the envelope?
Yes.
And then we see another bag here. Is that correct?
Yes, this is an inner package, and the specimen container was within this inner plastic bag.
All right. And so within that bag, showing you people's 204. Do you see that?
Yes.
What is it?
This is 4 pieces of skull bone that was submitted in the specimen container.
Okay. And those pieces of skull bone, were they originally inside that plastic tube?
Yes.
Okay. So you were you the one that took it out, put it in the Petri dish, and took a photo?
Yes.
Now showing you people's 209. What are we looking at here in this photograph?
This is just a zoomed in picture of one of the pieces that I took with a camera in the laboratory.
All right. So before we go any further, you said that one of the areas in which you've testified, or I'm sorry, that you kind of specialize in, if you will, is paint transfer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So my understanding is, let's say there's a traffic collision between 2 vehicles. One's blue and the other one's yellow. And there may be paint transfer from the blue vehicle to the yellow or vice versa. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So now, with regard to paint transfer, is that the only type of circumstance in which there would be paint transfer?
No.
All right. So explain.
Well, paint transfer can happen anytime a painted surface comes in contact with something else. So oftentimes we will receive clothing from victims who have been hit by vehicles, and their clothing might contain that paint transfer, not necessarily vehicle to vehicle.
All right. So will you educate the jury specifically with regard to your expertise as it relates to paint transfer?
So I examine and analyze paint evidence when it comes in any fashion. It could be architectural paint, marine paint. It depends on what the items are that are involved. In this situation, I was requested to analyze paint from the bat and compare it to black particles that were found embedded in the bone.
All right. Now, showing you people's 213. All right, what are we looking at in this photograph?
So this is just another more close-up photograph taken with a microscope to show that there are dark transfer materials on the surface and also embedded within and below some of the fractures.
Now, looking at this, is your job basically, all right, you take a zoomed-in photograph of the skull and you see black on the skull, so you come to a conclusion that's paint transfer?
No, I would need to analyze it first.
All right, and how do you do that?
So in this particular situation, I removed those particles and I analyzed them using a variety of techniques, including a microscope, actually 2 different types of microscopes, and also what we call infrared analysis or instrumental analysis for the chemistry of the paint or the substance.
All right, and so were you able to determine whether that is in fact paint?
Yes.
All right. And black in color?
Yes.
Okay. Now, but you also received the bat.
That's correct.
All right. And why did you need to, or did you analyze the bat?
I did.
And why would you need to do that because you've already determined that there's black paint on the skull?
Well, I was requested to compare it to the paint from the bat.
To make sure that the paint from the bat corresponded with the paint to the skull.
That's correct.
All right. And so tell us how you analyzed the bat.
I analyzed the bat in the same manner. I began by, after documenting it completely, retrieving small samples of the paint from the surface of the bat and analyzing them with the exact same methods that I analyzed this paint sample. And I did go back a few times and analyze several different areas of the bat.
Okay. And so what was your overall conclusion as far as the as far as whether there was paint transfer from the bat to the skull?
The particles that I examined from the bone were similar in almost every respect to the paint that was transferred from, or the paint that was on the bat.
Now, in order for paint to get on the skull, the skull would have to be exposed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In other words, if one hit to the head with the skin on it, in your opinion, would that cause paint transfer to the skull?
No.
All right. So there would have to be some sort of exposure to the skull in order for that paint from the bat to actually transfer onto the skull.
That's correct.
Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Witness excused or subject to recall?
No objection. Your
excuse is fine. You're excused, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Your Honor, people rest, subject to the conditions of exhibits.
All right. Reserving any motion, is there going to be any defense evidence?
No.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, the case is now closed to evidence. So here's how we will be proceeding. You will be let go for the balance of the day. The lawyers and I have to go over the exhibits. We also have to go over the jury instructions, which is the law that I will be reading to you. And all of that will be done outside of your presence. So we're going to let you go for the day, and then you will come back tomorrow morning. When you come back tomorrow morning at 9:30, you will hear closing arguments of the attorneys. And the case should be in your hands either sometime late tomorrow morning or early tomorrow afternoon. Remind all of you not to discuss the facts of this case amongst yourselves or with anyone unrelated to the trial.